أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على سيدنا ومولانا أبي القاسم المصطفى محمد
اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد
وعلى أهل بيت الطيبين الطاهرين المعصومين لا سيما بقية الله في الأراضين وروحي وأرواح العالمين له الفداء رب اشرح لي صدري ويسر لي أمري واحلل عقدة من لساني يفقهوا قولي. So dear brothers and sisters, first of all, I'll say it's a real pleasure to be here. Alhamdulillah, Allah has finally allowed me the opportunity of coming here, and I was pleasantly surprised. When I got a chance to see, alhamdulillah, the work that's been done, the help of Allah for the brothers and sisters, I was pleasantly surprised. Inshallah, this is only the beginning. Hopefully, we're not witnessing the end, but rather just the beginning and just tapping into the potential of the path of the Ahlul Bayt in this part of the world. So inshallah, for these 3 nights, I would like to talk about this idea, the idea of the goodly life, and how to experience the goodly life. And I want to mention some points that I feel will be relevant. Of course, for all of us, hopefully we can use this discussion and these types of discussions to prepare for the return of the Imam, which is our real goal. So we'll remind ourselves of some of the things that we find in Quran and Sunnah which help strengthen us. Because all of us, brothers and sisters, we're all part of the global resistance. We're all preparing in our own way the world for the return of the Imam, and there's certain steps that we need to take. So in order for us to experience the goodly life, let's remind ourselves of some things. One of those things we remind ourselves is something which we believe the 12th Imam is here to do for us. The job of the 12th Imam and all of the prophets, all of the Anbiya, what God wanted for mankind, that human beings would be able to experience the fullness of His blessings. God's best. That was the job of the prophets. All of the prophets were here that each and every member of mankind be able to experience God's bless. I'm going to mention the verses later where we'll talk, and the words will be used. Hayat tayyaba, the goodly life. So what does that mean? But in order for us, we'll talk about a little bit about what that means and what our potential is, inshallah, but we also need to talk about some practical steps. I'd like to mention a couple of the practical steps that we as followers of the path of the Ahlul Bayt and followers of the Anbiya need to do in order to experience the goodly life. So, what happens is that God is not selfish. God's generous. And God has created a certain potential for mankind. I'm going to mention, inshallah, the verses and some of the ahadith later. God has a life that He intended for us, that He'd like us to have. The best the fullness of His blessings, that's what He'd like us to have. But we'll see many times people stop themselves from being able to experience that good life. So let's start off with the beginning. In the beginning, we see that we are the best of Allah's creation. Allah, when He describes us in the Quran, He talks about us as human beings. This is reminding us of our potential, what we're capable of, what we can do, and how far we can go. When Allah is talking about telling Shaitan to prostrate before Adam, He tells him to prostrate to that which I made with my 2 hands. Lima khalaqtu biyadayya. What I made with my 2 hands. And it doesn't mean that God is like a human being, He has 2 hands. No. This shows importance. Ihtimam. That God, when He's describing us in our creation, He says, what I've created with my 2 hands. Our importance is so much that in Hadith Qudsi, Allah says, He's speaking to us, son of Adam. He says, Abdi, my slave. Khalaqtul ashya'a li ajli. I made all of the things that you can see for your sake. Wa khalaqtuka li ajli. And He created you for me. We have been created for God. All of the things that we see around here, we're supposed to be able to benefit, use for the sake of God. There's some of these things that we haven't even began to scratch at the potential. For instance, there are verses of the Quran that probably you've heard, I've heard, we've said, perhaps read over before, where it talks about a concept called taskhir. right? To bring things under our will, under our control. And when you look at those verses of the Quran, we find out that everything that's here is potentially made in such a way so that it can be brought under our control. But what you hear from senior ulama is this. Right now, the sun, for instance, right? We are being affected by it. We're not controlling it. We're not controlling it. But that's one of those things. There's so many other things that all have been created in that way, that they can be brought under our control. It's up to us. So one of the things is that we're the best of Allah's creation. We're the greatest of Allah's creation. Everything's been created for us. And we're supposed to be able to benefit from these things in order to move in the direction of God and benefit mankind and the rest of the world. There's something else that I feel isn't discussed enough. And I want to mention that too. The other thing that we find in our hadith, and I'll mention one, is that you and I, in addition to being the greatest of Allah's creation, in some ways we're different. You and I have different talents and things that we're good at. Things that are in each individual. For instance, you'll find some people, I know you've seen this, I've seen this. Some people are very good at math, for instance, numbers, for instance. Other people are gifted as teachers, for instance. I've seen people who are good at a certain skill, but they couldn't teach it. Other people, they're naturally teachers. They'll take you, they'll walk you through the steps. Right? Some people are good at teaching. Some people are gifted at other things. Sports, right? This is a guy, when we were, back in the days when we were in Qom, this guy, when it came to the learning Farsi, right? He was Chinese. The language of Farsi was so difficult, he could not put two words together. But when it came to sports, this guy, he was something else. I noticed other thing about Hausa students. Some of us would be what I would call a philosophy person. They would get philosophy. For me, philosophy, that's not one of my areas of I struggle. Right? Some people are fiqh, jurisprudence. Right? That would be their area. So what happens is each and every one of us has a different area of talent. There's something else that we bring to the table. So now listen to this hadith from Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. He says, "An-nasu ma'adin ka-ma'adin al-dhahab wal-fidda." People are ma'adin. Ma'adin, I've been looking for a word. Every community I go to, I'm looking, what's the best way to describe this? A ma'adan is where you have underground resources, right? The words of the Prophet, he says that people are mines, for lack of a better word. Like you have mines of gold and silver. Some people are gold, some people are silver. People have different talents. What happens is two things. One of them, some people never realize that potential that they have. They never become what Allah intended them to be. Some people also, they don't ever explore those talents that Allah had given them. They end up doing one thing, but it wasn't really that gift that Allah had granted them, what they could have done with themselves. And what we see from the Anbiya, the path of the Anbiya, is they're here to awaken, what Imam Ali calls, the buried intellects. Somebody might have those talents, those gifts. The intellect, which is there to push all of us towards God, towards Ahlul Bayt, it's there, but it's buried. He says the job of the Anbiya is to excavate, to bring out that talent, that buried intellect, in the words of the hadith, to bring it out. So what happens is, we don't want to be sitting on the top of the world's greatest treasure, and then take all of our talents and skills, what we could potentially do for Islam, for the Muslims, and just take that all to the grave. And never have it discovered, never have used it, never have experienced the goodly life. That would be a real shame. That Allah has made us all of this talent. We're a powerhouse sitting here, can do so much good, but it dies with me. But many people go through life being mediocre. Especially when it comes to the most important part of their life, which is the spiritual part of their life. Some people never discover their other talent, or they partially discover them and they use them in the wrong way. They don't use them in such a way that it benefits them, mankind. God, a decree, or he decreed a term, وَأَجَلٌ مُسَمًّى عِنْدَهُ. And there is a specified or fixed term with him. What does this mean? There's an ajal, there's one decree, and then there's a fixed term. The Imam tells us this is the sixth Imam. He says that you have one lifespan, which is the furthest you can go, a fixed one. Let's say your lifespan is to live 120 years, or 200 years. That's your lifespan. My lifespan, if I do all of the things right, I'm only going to live to be 150. For instance, he says, but then there's another one, another lifespan that's contingent to our actions. Now what the Prophet says is that most people never live their full lifespan. Most people die early because of dhunub, because of sins. Right? So God intended that we live a certain way, a certain life. He wanted to give us His best. People stop themselves from experiencing God's best, and people end up committing sins, for instance, and they end up not living as long as God has intended. That's one example. There's other examples. Salawat, please. I'll give you another example. If you look in the verses of the Quran that talk about the believers in jihad. Right? There's verses of the Quran. This one you can look it up later. It's Surah 8 and verse number 65. It says that it talks about the potential of the believers. It says that if there be 20 patient men amongst you, they shall overcome 200. It's a famous verse. If there's 20 of you, you can overcome 200. And it says, and if there be 100 of you, they shall overcome 1,000. Right? So it's again the 10-to-1 ratio. But then we have that other verse that explains to us that right now, because of the believer's weakness, then it's 1-to-2. The believers could have been, the potential of the believers is to be greater than 10. Right? The verse says that if there's 20 of you, you'll overcome 200. Right? The strength of the believers, what they can possibly do, potentially do, is greater than that of 10-to-1. So I'll give you an example. Allah Ta'ala talks about this. He says in the Battle of Badr, the numbers were 14-to-1. The believers were 1 versus 14 and 1. Right? The potential of the believers. So I'm trying to create a picture in our minds, the idea that we have one thing that we're capable of, a life that Allah would have liked us to experience, and then many people stop themselves from experiencing that goodness. What we have from the leader is two things. He says one of them is this: if we're pessimistic about our abilities, right? There's some people, when it comes to their abilities, the talents that Allah's given them, they always tell themselves, no, I'll never do this. I can never accomplish this. Who am I? Right? They talk themselves out of it. He says being pessimistic about your abilities is being ungrateful to Allah. Being ungrateful to Allah. The other thing he says is very interesting. He says that with reliance on Allah, if there's a believer who can connect and rely on Allah, the potential for good is unlimited because God's unlimited. The potential for good is unlimited because God's unlimited. So what happens is, when you look at the path of the Ahlul Bayt, you'll see that many times the Ahlul Bayt, or at least in this one hadith that I'm going to show you, when they would see somebody who would settle for less and want to be mediocre and not have great ambition when it came to developing their spirituality and getting close to God, they would not like that. They wouldn't be impressed by that. There's a famous hadith where a guy comes over to the Prophet. It's told in different ways in the hadith. But this guy comes over to the Prophet and he tells the Prophet, do you recognize me? The Prophet says, who are you? He says, I was your host in Ta'if. I was your host back in the day. I was your host in a city called Ta'if. Now you're in Medina and you're in charge. Now I'm here to get the favor back. The Prophet said, what do you want? Marhaba, what do you want? The guy said, now he knew exactly what he wanted. He said, 80 sheep. Imam Ali's telling this story. He says the Prophet was like this. If you would ask the Prophet something and he would want to do it, the Prophet would say, yeah, he would agree. If you wouldn't, the Prophet would be silent. He wouldn't reject you, but he wouldn't. Right? And this guy was so happy. The Prophet said, okay. The first step was the Prophet put his head down. He said, okay, Bismillah. The guy left. He had his 80 sheep. Alhamdulillah, things are good. He left. And the Prophet said, look, why wasn't this guy like the old woman from Bani Israel? Who's the old woman from Bani Israel? He starts telling a story. He said, in the time of Nabi Musa, when they had instructions to run away from Pharaoh, they were running away from Pharaoh. They came to the ocean, to the sea, and the sea didn't split. They're whipping the animals, the sea won't split. Nabi Musa realized something is abnormal, asks Allah, what is happening? They said, you have to take the body of the remains of Yusuf with you. So Musa starts asking the people, he says, who knows where Yusuf's buried? Pharaoh's on his way, we gotta go, the ocean won't up. They said, if anybody knows, it's this old lady. He goes and he finds the old lady. Bismillah, now tell me, we gotta, it's serious. Pharaoh's coming, we gotta go. She says, only if you promise to give me what I asked you for. He said, for sure, Bismillah, you can have. He said, if you give me what I asked you for, say that. Then she said, I want to be with you in your place in paradise. Your prophet was Ulul Azam. I want to be with you in your place in paradise. They said when Nabi Musa heard that, he started negotiating. Paradise, Jannah, you want, right? I want to be with you. And she said, no. And then Allah gave wahi. He said that don't worry, grant her that. We won't reduce you even one iota. Now, the prophet who's telling the story says this. He says, what stopped him from asking that question? You have the prophet of God asking you, what do you want? All I want is to be mediocre. 80 sheep, alhamdulillah. Being that mediocre, right? As opposed to where could we? So what we're going to try and do, inshallah, we'll see. And again, I don't have a clock here, so I don't want to keep you guys prisoners. We'll try and cover some of the steps tonight. Inshallah, if Allah gives tawfiq, cover some of them tomorrow. The first thing, though, is before we even go over any steps, are we willing to do what's necessary to experience God's best? That's the big question. Are we willing to do what's necessary? I remember hearing a story once. They said there was this lady, she went with her husband to the doctor. She went with her husband to the doctor. The doctor ran the test. Some serious symptoms, ran the test. The old man stepped out of the room, and now the wife is in the room with the doctor. She said, doctor, please tell me what's wrong with my husband. I can take it. Tell me what's wrong. He said, your husband has a very serious condition. Really? Yeah. He says, only one way your husband can live. Said, whatever it is, I'll do it. Whatever it is. He said, whatever? Okay. He says, you can't give your husband any stress whatsoever. You got to spoil him rotten. You got to tell him how much you love him. You got to serve him 3 meals a day. You got to do this. You got to do that. You got to make him feel wonderful. Wait on him, hand him foot, and then he'll live. She came out of the doctor's office. The husband turned to her and said, honey, what did the doctor say? She said, you're going to die. we have to take practical steps. If we're going to do this, practical steps in order to experience God's best. So now there's some practical steps that I'm going to mention. Right? And we have to go over these one at a time. Each one of them, though, are very important. The first practical step is this. And I want to make sure we do this not only for ourselves, but for believers, the next generation of believers. Because each one of us, we have a circle of influence. The first condition in order to experience God's best is that Islam has to be an intellectual realization. We personally have to be convinced that Islam is the truth, that the Quran is the word of God. Right? We're going to have to, if we want to experience God's best, we're going to have to take steps, right? Step out in faith. Right? But we have to personally and each and individually be convinced that Islam is the truth. Our children have to be convinced. I've seen in some Sunday schools where people go over and the way they teach Islam is memorization. Islam is basically facts. Right? When was the Prophet born? How many usul ad-din are there? Right? But being intellectually convinced that Islam is the truth, that's what has to happen. It's not enough to just have good deeds. I've seen people who have a lot of good deeds and are outwardly practicing in a way that shows they have a lot of iman. But because they're not intellectually convinced, sometimes when those bala come, when those difficulties come, the person, instead of being able to weather the storm, they start to question God himself. Why? Why me? How come? If we're intellectually convinced, what difference does it make, right? Being intellectually convinced of this religion. By the way, even when we're talking to non-Muslims, right? There's non-Muslims who are out there, who are smart people, intelligent people. And people who are not so dumb that they don't know that they were created by God. They know God exists. They've also accepted what's out there of religion. Let's say they're Christian. But sometimes they themselves see there's contradictions in the religion. There's certain parts, they just have to put their mind aside for a minute because there's certain things that just don't make sense. Right? Islam is not like that. Intellectually, we've got to be convinced. It's not enough to just take good actions. And it's not that difficult, by the way. Meaning the answers, the reasons that we have for practicing the religion, for saying why God exists, it's not that difficult. It's rockets. No, it's easy. Somebody should easily be able to do this. But we have to make sure we go through this process. Right? Islam is a religion. The first part of it was that it didn't contradict itself. The second part is that religion is going to have answers. Right? Religion is not something that sides with the oppressors. If there was a deen that would side with, it was okay with tyrants. It didn't tell us to stand up for the oppressed. It didn't tell us to make life better for the rest of man. It couldn't provide answers for the social problems that we're going through. We also would reject that deen. Islam is not that religion. Making sure that we're intellectually convinced is important. I remember hearing another story. They said once there was these three old men, they were thinking they're failing their memory. They went for a test and went to the doctor. So the doctor came to the first old man and told the old man, he said, memory test. He said, what's 3 times 3? And I looked at him. He said, 247. To the next old man, he said, what's 3 times 3? He said, Tuesday. Came to the last old man. He said, what's 3 times 3? He said, 9. He said, Subhanallah. Alhamdulillah. He said, how'd you get that? He said, it was easy. I subtracted Tuesday from 247, came up with 9. So for us, that's not...
Oh my God.
It was a step-by-step conviction, absolute conviction, because later on, if Allah gives tawfiq, brothers and sisters, later on I want to give certain verses of the Quran. Right? Promises of God. If I'm intellectually convinced that the Quran is literally the Word of God, it's been revealed letter by letter to Prophet Muhammad, then I can take that verse of the Quran and act on it. Right? It's a miracle, a divine miracle. But first, how I get to there is that intellectual conviction. So it's absolutely necessary for us in order to experience God's best. Number 2 is also important. In Islam, if you want to experience God's best, Allah teaches us that we have to be people who perform the wajibat. Islam is not a religion where it's enough to just have a good heart. It's different than Christianity, different secular people who are moral, but they're secular people, right? My heart's good, or even religion, my heart's in the right place. In Islam, the expectation is going to be that we perform wajibat. Perform our duties. Even to this extent, that a woman, she says her husband, he told her, he said, give this message to Fatima Zahra, salam. Please send a salawat.
Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa ala Muhammad.
He said that I want you to take this message to the lady, Fatima Zahra, and ask her, am I one of your Shia? Important. So she went, took the message to her, and the lady answered in this way. She said, if you do those things we command you to do, and you stay away from those things we tell you to stay away from, then you are a Shia. Wa illa fala. If you're not, no. In Islam, it's very clear. Being a believer, I'm going to mention the verse of the Quran. If you're a believer, you have to act. And we want to get this, we want to make sure this is clear in all of our minds before the Imam returns. Believers have to act. This verse is very clear. Surah 8, verse number 1. Let's read the Arabic together. It says this. وَأَطِيعُوا اللَّهَ. Obey Allah. وَأَطِيعُوا اللَّهَ وَرَسُولَهُ. And His Messenger, in kuntum mu'mineen. If you are believers. If somebody doesn't, I'm a believer, but I'm not a believer. Very clear. In kuntum mu'minin. If you're a believer, then obey Allah and His Messenger. It's kind of like that story I heard. Once they said there was this little kid, and he had a dog. The dog's name was Benji. Benji got sick, and the vet took Benji to the vet. When he came back, and Benji was, the little kid could see on the dad's face that dad's upset. He knew it was bad news. He said, Daddy, what happened? What'd the vet say? He said, Benji's not going to be with us too long. The little kid started crying. He said, how long do we have? He said, about 3 weeks. He's crying now. The dad was like, don't cry. Benji wouldn't want you to be sad. Benji would want you to remember the good times. He said, Daddy, when Benji dies, can we have a funeral? He said, yeah, we can have a funeral. He said, can we invite all of my friends? He said, invite all of you. He said, can we have ice cream and cake? He said, yeah, we can have ice cream and cake. He said, Daddy, can we kill Benji today? And this time the expectation, if there's iman, if there's faith, then the person's going to act. In kuntum mu'mineen. Right? We're waiting for the 12th imam. If the person believes, then they're going to act. Last one is very important, and I'm going to end with this tonight, inshallah. The one that's been troubling us for a long time. Right? So the first one, the idea, intellectually you have to be convinced. Absolutely. Next one, wajibat. I'm sure when I come to an audience like this, and mu'mineen, when I speak the idea, we're not that far off the path that we think we don't have to do any wajibat. No, we have to do wajibat. We have to perform our responsibilities. That's not even a question. What's the one that's been troubling the members of the Ahlul, the followers of the Ahlul, for a long time? That one, let me mention it. And let me give some explanations. What we find in the verses of the Quran is this. In order to be a believer, a mu'min, we have to have those things I mentioned. One, we have to be intellectually convinced. Secondly, our iman must create action. Then there's a third condition. The third condition is that we're not allowed to pick and choose in the religion. We're not allowed to have certain favorite parts of Islam. I like this about Islam, but that other part of Islam I don't do. It's okay. That we're going to discover from the verses of the Quran is absolutely unacceptable. Right? Partial obedience is disobedience. Now I'll give you some examples from the Quran, and then I want to mention the area we've been struggling in up until now. Right? What we have to do different before the Imam comes, so he can bring us God's best. So the first example, we can look this up in the verses of the Quran. This is in Surah Baqarah, and it's verse number 84. There's a story over there. Look it up later. Surah Baqarah. What happens is there's a group of Jews in the Quran. And God describes them. What happens to these Jews in the Quran? These individuals, God takes a covenant from them in the verse. Right? In the verse, it says this. And when we took a covenant from you, right? God took a covenant. Do not shed the blood of your own. Right? Don't kill other fellow Jews. And do not expel your own from their homes. Don't expel them from their houses. Now God mentions something else though. He says these Yahud, what they would do is they would do all kind of atrocities to one another. Zulm, oppression, shed blood, expel you from their homes. But then he mentions something strange. He says, if a group of the Yahud came to them, and they were prisoners, they were slaves for instance, these Yahud would say that we have to ransom them. In the holy book, according to the holy book, you have to ransom the Yahud. They can't be slaves of another, for instance. So then God calls them out. If it's the case that they're Yahud, and it's because of your holy book that you're doing this, why'd you kill them? Why'd you kick them out? Right? All the laws came from one source. Why pick one law, ransoming the Yahud? If they're come to you as prisoners, you have to ransom. Why pick that out of the verse? And then God talks about it over there. Right? Those who believe in part of the book and reject part. Believe in part of the book and reject part. Now I want to give you another example. This example is from history. In history, what happens is that We've all heard of the Khawarij, right? What happened? Amirul Mu'mineen, after he fought Muawiyah, there was a group from those Muslims, and these individuals got so angry at Imam Ali because he rejected the arbitration. He accepted the arbitration. They were the ones who imposed the arbitration on Imam Ali first. Then Imam Ali went with that. Then after that, they didn't like the results of it. Then they went over and they started quoting those verses of the Quran, in al-hukm illa lillah, with those guys, the Khawarij. Their story, though, is interesting. So what happens is the Khawarij moved to a place called Nakhshavan. And Imam Ali had a governor over there, Abdullah bin Khabbab. And they went to Abdullah bin Khabbab and they arrested him. They arrested him, they arrested his wife. They arrested his wife and him. Then they started to interrogate him. They said, what do you believe about Ali? What do you believe about the first Khulafa? They interrogated him. And he went over and answered the appropriate way. Ali knows what he's doing, this and any other. They said, oh, you're following your nafs? We're going to kill you in such a way that we haven't killed anybody. And they took Abdullah and they brought him under a date tree. Right? So under a date tree. Before they killed Abdullah, this is what happened. What happened was under a date tree, some dates over there, the dates started to fall to the ground. Some of the Khawarij, one of them went over and he picked up a few dates off the ground. He put it in his mouth and started eating. The other Khawarij, Astaghfirullah. You just ate dates without permission? You took dates off the ground? Astaghfirullah. Another one of the Khawarij did something else. A pig came by. When the pig came by, one of the Khawarij, he killed it. He hit it. Fasad in the earth. Allah, you killed a pig with his astaghfirullah. He went over and he went to the owner of the pig. I'm so sorry, I killed your pig without permission. Right? That's wrong. Then what did they do? Then they killed Abdullah. They killed his wife. His wife was heavily pregnant. They took the baby out. Right? These same people, one part of Islam, eating halal, chicken, a date falls to the floor, and there's slaughtering someone, murder of women, right? Picking and choosing. This part of Islam is okay. This part, as believers, we're not allowed to even have an opinion once God's spoken. The verse of Quran, I believe it's Surah 4:65, right? It says, Fala wa rabbik. God swears by himself. Fala wa rabbik. By your Lord. La yu'minun. They do not believe. They do not believe. He says, Hatta yuhakkimuk. Until they make you be a judge. And that, right? They take you as a prophet as fima shajara bainahum. There's a dispute amongst the believers. The believers say, whatever the prophet says. After that says, ثُمَّ لَا يَجِدُوا فِي أَنفُسِهِمْ حَرَجًا مِمَّا قَضَيْتَ. After that, they don't even find a little bit of straightness in their hearts for that which you've decided. وَيُسَلِّمُوا تَسْلِيمًا. And they submit thoroughly. If a believer, we have hadith. If a believer says anything about something God has decided, God or the Prophet went over, he made a certain decision, and even in the believer's heart, in their heart of hearts, they're like, I don't like that. It says, to that extent, the believer is a mushrik. Once God has decided, once God's made a decision, right? We don't picking and choosing. I like this part of it. I don't like that. I do this. I'm uncomfortable with that. Right? The other parts are supposed to already be there. I'm already intellectually convinced. God has spoken. My Lord is, my Creator is speaking. Now the last part, I'm just going to wrap up with this, is where is the area this is always. So there have always been believers who picked and choose, and that we learned, that's not Iman. And then there's one area that people have always found difficult. The real area that people have always found difficult is this one. The political wilaya of the Ahlul Bayt. The political wilaya of the Ahlul Bayt. I'll give you an example. You've probably heard these hadith where it says, Irtadda nas. The people became murtad. After the Prophet, Irtadda nas. They became murtad. Or after in Karbala, Irtadda nas. Except for 3 people. And after Karbala, everybody became murtad. Question, does that mean everybody, after the Prophet died, everybody stopped praying? Everybody, suddenly they stopped making salah?
They stopped paying zakat. We were doing those things. What was the area that they became murtad for? Where did they pick and choose? That God would say that the hadith said murtad. Remember the story of Lady Fatima? This is how the story went. So what happens? The Prophet's been passed. Once the Prophet passed, then Amirul Mu'mineen didn't immediately go for the Khilafah. Remember, 3 days Amirul Mu'mineen went and he buried, he was washing the bodies, doing these things, and the others started to do things. And then what happened? Then after that, once things had become firm, 3 days later, then now Amirul Mu'mineen says, I want to get my rights. And Amirul Mu'mineen came to the houses of the believers. The political wilaya of the Ahlul Bayt. Now Ali comes to your door, he has Hassan, he has Hussein, he's knocking on the door. Now come over and defend us. The political wilaya of the Ahlul Bayt. Fasting, Hajj, all of these different things, that's wonderful. Now come and sacrifice everything you have. Remember the story, you've heard it already. What happened? Imam Ali said, come with your head shaved. Right? You're walking away from your business, your career, your house, your income, your friends. Come drop everything. Political wilaya of the Ahlul Bayt. Now she's knocking on the door. Lady Fatima, she herself came. She told them, she said, you're supposed to defend me. The people, they said 3 people made it. 3 people. So the idea of picking and choosing. Okay, well that's not Iman. Or that area which is most sensitive, which is that political wilaya of the Ahlul Bayt. So in order to experience God's best, we have to make sure that those areas are wrapped up, those areas, and then after that, what we need to discuss from tomorrow going forward is, what does God give us? How do we experience that goodness? What does God give us? But we'll end, inshallah. The first